Wilson. Welcome to the Grind Diaries.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming along. I really appreciate it. I guess first of all, if we start with just kind of introducing yourself and letting people know what you do.
Yeah, so I've done a lot of things in the past, but currently about 5 years ago I set a business called Omnicommerce up. So we're a SaaS insight and consulting business, predominantly retail, but we do cover sort of a bit of B2B and a bit of leisure. And yeah, so I'm the founder. I've got a couple of guys who've been with me from the start, actually. They're sort of co-founders. Yeah, so we've got about 40 clients, and ranging from businesses doing a couple of million a year to some doing over 100 million. And yeah, built it from scratch. So yeah, that's a slightly longer story. I'm sure we'll get into that.
Yeah, definitely. No, it's really interesting. And obviously we met, a couple of months ago now, just through a mutual friend. Little shout out to Alan Wilson, what a legend, for putting us in touch.
I've got another name for him, but not a legend, but not for a podcast.
Another day.
Yeah.
So we had a good chat up the pub and talked about all the different things that you've been up to over the years. So it's really, really interesting. I think what I love about what you're doing now is it's like, it's very much in line with what I do in my kind of real world, if you like, my real life job. So it's something that I could kind of understand, and it's quite a unique service, right? It's not something that would have an awful lot of competition, because if I remember rightly, it's quite a unique service.
Yeah, it is. So there's, these days you can do a load of research on sort of ChatGPT and Google Gemini 3 and whatever in terms of what's out there and who's doing what, and it gives you a critique of what it is. And I think we sort of straddle a market where there's a bunch of people who have SaaS platforms that tend to be sort of lower price point, sort of hands-off, plug and play. And then you've got at the other end, your top consultants, whether it's sort of, Javelin, McKinsey, whatever, who will come in and spend a load of money to give these sort of strategic and tactical interventions. And we sort of sit in the middle, really, I think, which is we've got a platform, and I still think it's, I had a meeting today with an ad agency who want to do more work with us that we met at a client marketing agency, and he said, look, we generally just haven't seen anything like that, and I hear it all the time in terms of the breadth and depth. And so, but it's so complex that you need someone to help you navigate it, and that's where our sort of slight differences. We'll meet with you monthly. We've got these things that we call growth workshops, where we literally have those monthly meetings looking at all of the stuff around the trading, all of the stuff around the pace of growth and how that could be different. And I stand by the fact there's sort of world-class interventions monthly into that business for a really sensible fee. And so that's why we're a bit different to others. It's a sort of, you hear some of this, it's sort of either SaaS plus or asset-based consulting. I've heard the term, so it's a bit of that, really. I don't like those words, really, but that's sort of describes what we are.
Yeah, it's cool. And was it always going to be that, or did you kind of get to a point where you thought, we can't just let people try and do this on their own because they're not going to get all the value out of it?
It's definitely changed over 5 years. One of the things is the client size is probably 5 times the size that they were in terms of fee. So we've migrated up as the quality of the product improved, you could convince bigger businesses that there was a need. And typically, in most cases, they're yet to go on that insight journey. So they have brilliant entrepreneurs, great ideas, have got a long way, lots of energy, often amazing teams, but they probably haven't got an analyst in-house. And so, if they've got investors, the investors will come along and say, right, we think you need to have an analyst. And, an analyst is going to cost you 40, 50, 60 grand a year, probably just post-qualified or just got a data science degree. And in respectfully, they know nothing about business in the same way 30 years ago when I started at Superdrug. I didn't really know that much about margin and retros and all these things that come in the retail world. So, we sort of deliver that all on a plate instantly. And so it's a real viable alternative to building your own resource. And if you can get your head around you don't own it, but then, these days you don't go and build your own website, you just use Shopify, right? Or, you've got a choice where you have an in-house marketing team or outsource it. A lot of people, prefer to outsource it. So it's just outsourced insight, really.
Yeah, it's really cool. And I'm really interested to kind of get into how you came to kind of develop that and get that to where it is today. Obviously we've had a loose conversation about it.
Well, it sort of started a bit with... to cut a long story short, so my whole career, so I was an analyst I was chartered accountant trained, left straight away, went into the city thinking I was going to be a trader, realised it was a massive mess about to blow up, which it did eventually, in the city, around the time of the sort of, it was the financial meltdown.
Oh yeah.
So I left before that all happened because it just was crazy place, and ended up at Superdrug as an analyst, and then became a buyer for a year, and then got headhunted into the head office to be more of a corporate analyst, so not looking at what products were performing, more coming down to B&Q and find out what was going on at B&Q and why they, on behalf of the CFO. And then, just had a crazy couple of years there, was working directly for Sir Geoff Morkai, the CEO, for a while, and ended up being the head analyst, group chief analyst, so heading up the team, and then got made head of strategy for the general merchandise businesses, so Woolworths and Superdrug. And I was only 28, 29 at the time, so it was just insane. And then had the craziest turn of fate. Somehow I ended up as finance director of Argos at 30, and did 4 years there. And it was there was certainly 6 months in probably the best boss I've ever had. Kate Swan sort of pulled me in and said, you've got 6 months base, it's not going that well. And I was like, oh shit. And I knew, I wasn't particularly experienced and needed to sort the team out, and I was on that. I knew that was the key. And then just sort of pulled it round really, and had a great couple of years after that. And then ended up at Tesco, heading up their non-food internet business. So launched Tesco Direct for them.
Right.
And we did that in 9 months. It was an incredible project to be involved in. And actually, at the time, Argos had these little, they had these stores in little towns that they didn't hold stock in. And they used to do about 700k a year, but from a crappy little site in, some little market town or sub-market town, high street. And so they're paying no rent really, relatively. But they would turn over, they just didn't hold any stock. So you'd order the stuff and you'd go and get it the next day, but they were doing 700 grand a year. So I went into Tesco, and they weren't thinking about having a store presence. And I'm like, well, why don't you just have a load of these in all your stores? And I think the first one in Cambridge took over £1 million in a year from like a no bigger than this room, and so that whole concept of I guess click and collect, but sending it from a central warehouse rather than in the store like Argos used to do it. We pretty much made that mainstream because we had 100 of those. Now since then they've the whole project, ended up going a bit backwards, I think, through Tesco probably not handling it correctly, because I still think it was the right thing to do. And ultimately, we built a version of Argos, which was a better version of Argos at the time. And, they let that wilt a bit. And, of course, now Sainsbury's, you have put a load of Argoses in the Sainsbury's stores. So we predated that by about 15 years, So, and then after that, was CEO of a business called M&M Direct, clothing business. It was turning over, about over 100 million by the time I left. So we sort of doubled the profits there. Learned a lot about detail because, in some of these C-suite roles, you are involved in the detail, but it's private equity backed business. You're in the nuts and bolts of how do I make this, using my analytical skills outperform. And I think that's probably the start of some of the stuff I do now. I'd done a lot of analytical stuff before, but when you're probably the most experienced analyst in the business, because it was a smaller business, you just have to roll your sleeves up and get involved in, how do you make a £10 million catalogue investment more profitable? Where is the wastage? Can you do some detailed maths on that? So you you end up sort of learning, what is Google ads? At the time, again, we're talking whatever 15 years ago. The analytics around Google ads weren't great.
No.
Getting hold of the data, putting it in a spreadsheet, manipulating it, and how does that align with I'm spending this much on trousers, but how much does a trouser customer make me over their life, and customer lifetime value, all those things. It just all ended up being absorbed in a quite a tense period. But unfortunately, we hit the last recession, and it was a business that sold overstocks, and all the big manufacturers started to cut back on production runs because they could see, and the working class customer, which was our customer, got hit hardest first. So basically, they got rid of me, having doubled the profits and stuff. I don't, it is what it is, and I don't, these privately run businesses, they demand results, and a global worldwide recession wasn't a good enough excuse for them at the time. So and then, so I know I'm rambling a little bit about stuff, but went back to B&Q for a little while to help a mate out who was the CEO there as customer director. Did another spell in a privately backed business, which we might talk about later, and then ended up doing some consulting after that, and that's how I ended up here. Really, was I'd go into businesses and help them with their paid search, or help them with their strategy or their forecasting, and I'd start to build these tools out. And I'd always done stuff on Microsoft Access rather than Excel, and then I just read an article on Power BI, and I was like, oh blimey, this is good. This is what I've been waiting for my entire career. If I had had this earlier, and actually launched a bed linen business, which was another trigger. So I'd seen how much bed linen we sold at Ashika, and I thought, what, can't be that hard. And so I launched this bed linen business and started to build out some analytics for it based on Power BI.
Okay.
And and it was a part-time thing for me, the business, and so I was doing the consulting, and then ended up at a point thinking, well, I could probably sell this to other people. This is really good, analytics data. And of course, I had real data to play with, which is always helpful. And
yeah, awesome. So that's kind of where you've got, your career's kind of gone from that initial kind of basic analytics all the way through to, excuse me, building your own kind of system out, and then I guess, like, what was the point at which you kind of made the jump from like being employed to like going out on your own? Was that forced? Was it a conscious decision, or how did that happen?
There's a little bit of a story there. So there was I had a couple of friends who run a really good travel IT and consulting business, and they did a bit of retail, and they said, well, why don't you come and help us for a bit? So they were very kind to give me some stuff, and I was like, well, look, I've got this platform, maybe we could build it out a bit together, and got a couple of assignments through them that helped develop it further. And I was there for a couple of years, and then COVID hit, and I genuinely don't blame them for this. I was probably was the biggest paid there, and they were like, look, actually, we think this isn't gonna be sustainable, because all of their money came from travel businesses, and there was no travel around the first year of COVID. So we sort of parted company and parted on friendly terms, and I sort of said to them, look, you're going to have to let me do this on my own, because it sort of is me, So they were like, yeah, that's fine, and we sort of parted company, and it was hugely cathartic. It was, I'll never forget, because it was a nice summer, that COVID summer, and really nice. I'm sat in my bedroom on a desk looking out the window, developing everything from scratch. So I didn't take anything with me. That was part of the deal. I had to sort of start from scratch, no clients, nothing, just just started coding, writing DAX and Power Query, and rewrote everything. And it was hugely cathartic, because I hadn't had the headspace to do that as it had evolved with them. And so to start with a blank sheet and paper, and a little, because they were going to keep doing a version of it. So I'm like, this has got to be better than what they do. Yeah. So I was like determined to take every page of every report and think, right, if I do this differently, it will be better than what they have. And it just, again, got a bit lucky. Some people that I'd spoken to before about using their platform, came back and said, "Oh, have you still got that platform?" And, "Oh yeah, I have." Yeah, but I think it's a better version now than it was, and I've got a couple of people to sign up, and it sort of grew from there, really.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, I'm really really keen to kind of get into. So sorry. I might have to cut that bit out, Jay. My throat, it's got worse, hasn't it, since we started talking? I'm sure of it. It's not, is it? Oh God.
Let's hope you last it.
Yeah. It's just my voice.
Yeah.
I can like, it wasn't that bad out there, sure of it.
Since you're talking.
We'll be good, yeah, I'll just keep talking. Really, really keen and interested to get into like all the, different kind of things and problems that you encountered on the way, because I'm sure there are a few of them. Before we do though, just love to know, what is your kind of definition of success?
As a person or a business, or what, just in general? Or?
As a person, I'd say, yeah. As a from your perspective, when do you kind of look back and go, that was, I've made it, I've done it, or like, what would you deem as that point?
Yeah, I think it's a hard one, really, because I had quite a lot of what people would traditionally call success early on, right? Like, I was finance director of Argos at 30, which is sort of, God, it was 5 years post qualification. I took a year out after university, right? So within sort of 9 years of starting work, or 8 years, I was doing that job. So obviously people would see that as being successful, but I think I'm still learning, right? And I'm still, I tell you, I phrase it quite slightly differently. What I think success is being really happy in what you're doing, and even with some of the roles when I was at like say B&Q customer director, it's a privilege to be the customer director. I got paid really well. Again, people would describe that as being successful. But it wasn't cutting edge enough for me. It wasn't in the weeds enough. And you could say, well, you could be in the weeds, but it's hard to be in the weeds when you got 100 people work for you.
Yeah.
You can't necessarily be in the spreadsheets all the time. And I sort of miss that. And so, I think I'd like to say I'm most successful now, because I think I'm the most contented I've been in a role, because I'm. When I went to places like M&M Direct and Ashika, I was in the weeds. I was trying to fix problems for them, make them better business. Now I'm doing that across 40 businesses, and so whether I'm sat there like I was today during the day coding, or whether we're in review meetings, giving these businesses that have perhaps not seen all the problems that I've seen advice. It's that and I think if you're happy doing it, if you come across Ikagi as a concept, without being too, I don't read many management books, but I came across this thing. It's a Japanese thing where they say you'll truly be happy, and I hope I get all four of them. There's four things. It's if you find something that you're good at, if you find something that you enjoy, if you find something that someone needs, and if you find something that someone will pay you money for or reward you for, then you'll truly be happy. And that's exactly where I'm at now. I love what I do. It's to the point that, I'll be sat there on a Saturday coding, because for me, that's my Sudoku. I don't like sitting there doing crosswords or whatever like other people do. I'd rather be solving real life business problems using code DAX, right? So, but it's because I enjoy it. I almost switch off, mentally through doing it, although it's quite mentally stimulating. It's sort of very relaxing for me. And of course, people do need it. And, I'd modestly say we are really good at it, and people pay us for it. So, I've sort of, it's probably the only management concept I'll ever talk about, but I've sort of found my Ikagi, which I probably pronounced incorrectly.
Yeah.
So apologies to anyone who's from Japan.
The Japanese will be listening to this.
Okay,
this. No, but I think that's really cool, and I love that whole concept, and I've not heard of that term before, but it does make an awful lot of sense. I think what a couple of things that kind of fascinate me a little bit if we start, you had some real success early on in your career, but it wasn't just, you didn't go into one big role and then fall out of it. You kind of went from big role to an even bigger role. Like, why was that? What was it about you that kind of attracted businesses to you, do you think?
I think I think if you look, I think people often will besmirch the fact there's a lot of luck in what you do. I think there's a hell of a lot of luck. I mean, you ride your own luck to some extent, but also you get a bit of luck, like the Argos role. I mean, who would have thought? I went for it, and even I, when I got further down the process, was like, shit, I might get this. You know what I mean? Never expecting to get it, And so I did end up, with that role, and like I said, perhaps I had a bit of a run in the first 12 months that I turned it around, whereas that could have been a bit of bad luck in the second 6 months. Something might have happened that would have been the death knell for me. There's been other roles where, I used to have a little sheet when I went into M&M Direct that we were on, with what you would earn if the business was sold, and we were on track. I was going to make 10 million quid, and I made relatively nothing out of it in the end because they got rid of me, right? So that wasn't my fault. It was, in my view, it was because there was a global worldwide recession, right? And the timing wasn't right. So I think that there's a bit of luck in all of it. But I do think I've always been honest and direct. There's no politics with me. Perhaps that's why I struggled a bit in the first year of Argos. A lot of really experienced retailers around you, point scoring, and not in a horrible way. It's just how it works. Same with Tesco. It's very sort of, I'll do this for you if you do this for me. There's a Tesco way of working, and I was all a bit naive in all that. I'm like, well, hold on, surely we should stick these in the store because they're going to take £1 million. Yeah, but you need to give them something. I was like, well, how does that work? I haven't got anything to give. So, there was I think there was a bit of naivety in it. I think I was a bit cheeky, I must admit. Like, there was a time when I was at Kingfisher and I was drinking buddies with some people, and they said, look, the results presentation is coming up and it's going to be a disaster because the person who was in charge of it wants to pitch it as a different thing, and the results aren't that great, and we think they're sort of softening it too much, and so I think I was a bit hungover, but I walked into Sir Jeff Mulcahy's office and said, everyone's saying that the thing next week's going to be a disaster, and you need to do something about it, I think. And he sort of looked at me and he went, what do you think I should do? And I said, well, I don't know. There's the people that are talking to me are saying you should probably get someone in who's done it before, and maybe not use the person that's doing it now. Well, and unfortunately, I think they sacked her that day, and they brought someone in, and it was much. It did recover the situation. I'm not like proud that someone got sacked, but it was more there was bigger stuff at play, right? Yeah. It was the share. The share price is bigger than someone's job, but there was a lot of people's livelihoods depending on the fact that Kingfisher needed to do well, right? And so, that was just on that point. When I got interviewed by Terry Leahy for the Tesco job that I got, he said to me, "Oh, look, can you talk about some people you work with?" And I mentioned a good colleague that I'd worked with, and I said, on the board, he was a really good friend, and he sort of leant in and looked at me and he said, "Can you have friends at work then?" And I was like, oh shit, what do I say? And you have to think on your feet. And I was like, look, I said, you can. I said, but ultimately, you're paid to do a job, and that has to rise above the friendship. And actually, over the years, I've had to make friends redundant and things, I was made redundant by the friends that I worked with prior to Omnicom often. But yeah, I think there was maybe a bit of cheek. I was never overly ambitious. I took the chances that I was given, with open hands, and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, controversially, I guess, I'm not a massive believer of luck. I think you hit the nail on the head. You said you've got to make your own luck, which I think is so true, because not only did you put yourself in those positions to get those roles, and you'd obviously did something that somebody looked at and thought, well, I believe that this person's capable. But I think you mentioned when you were finance director and things weren't going great, after 6 months, a lot of people would, I guess, it would crush a lot of people if they were in a role of that seniority, and to be told, they're not doing a great job, and they need to kind of turn it around. It feels like you kind of, that was almost a motivation to you, but
Yeah.
kind of like I don't know, like a eye-opening moment or something like that to make you. But I think my point really is that it wasn't one of those moments where you were just like, this is too big for me. I've got to own up, and I'm just gonna kind of walk away or go and find another job. It was like, well, hang on a minute, I'm not giving up on this, and I'm gonna plough through it, kind of thing.
I think there's a bit of that. Like I'd like to think I'm quite resilient. I mean, some of the situations that I've been through that haven't quite gone, because it's certainly not been all roses. I mean, there's been some darker moments for sure in my journey of how I've got here. So I'm sure you have to have an element of resilience to sort of get through that and it not impact you to the point you're right where you sort of you want to give up. So yeah, I think there's a bit of that. I am quite I do have a sort of bit of a, to coin a B&Q phrase, a sort of can-do attitude. Like I've always been, roll my sleeves up. You can solve this. You can think it through. It's not, there's always a logic to it. And even when, like I said, when the COVID happened, I was like, my wife was always like, I just can't believe you just said, right, okay. The second day after that, right, I'm going to get up on the laptop and start building this, and built a great business. And rather than, perhaps mope around a bit or take the summer off, I was like, right, need to get some money coming in.
Yeah.
So
it is a great story, and I think it's really inspiring as well, because like you say, a lot of people may have gone, that's a big hit. It's going to take a couple of weeks just to kind of consider my options, and but it kind of felt like you were just like, immediately, I know exactly what I'm going to do, and this is how I'm going to do it. I mean, had it ever crossed your mind that might happen? Was that something that you kind of preempted?
No, I think it's that thing, I don't know what the phrase is, the mother of necessity or whatever, but it was just, I had to, it helps, like I said, it helped that I enjoyed doing it. Yeah. It wasn't, I sort of knew, I knew we had something there, and I knew the we didn't have that many businesses under the old guys that we were helping, but I knew we were helping them. And so I generally thought there was a business in it, and that I was I had the right stuff with all my experience. And see, the thing is, you need the reason that businesses that struggle with this is you need 3 skill sets basically. You need to understand the technicality of the IT. You need to be analytical, but you need commercial and financial acumen, and it rarely exists in an individual. It's, I was always fortunate. I think that's, to your point about why I was successful. I think it was because I sort of bridged those 3 skill sets. And so there are other FDs that weren't as commercial and didn't understand that if you just pulled this data from here and there, you could have more insight. That's always been a bit of my special sauce. Even as a CEO, it was my special sauce. So, I always knew that was something that I was probably the thing that got me through those darker times. And so it was really like, how can I make this into a business and start off and make it successful. And since COVID, so what are we now, nearly 6 years, it's just indescribably different to how it was. I mean, the platform is insanely different in terms of depth and breadth. I'm constantly coming up with I've got a new version of our trading analytics coming out this month. It's the next step on from where we've been. So and of course we've got the whole AI stuff coming up, which I'm desperately trying to keep in on top of, and so that we can leverage it. So yeah, I think it's. I think I always thought we had something, and I knew that. But I'd have to say that sort of Matt and Joe. So Matt's my CTO, and I'd recruited him into the other business. They had to furlough him, and then eventually they got rid of him because they already had other developers. He was a developer at we'd done some work at B&Q using SQL, and I met him, and someone else interviewed him and said, "Oh, I don't think he's that good actually." And I said, "Well, I still want to see him," and I just thought, "Christ, this guy's got something. He's come over from Poland, and he was working in a call center, and he got a job at B&Q, and then he started building these spreadsheets and SQL things." I thought, "Christ, that takes a lot of something, right?"
Yeah,
and and he's been with me nearly 6 years, and he's been amazing, and he's amazing every day. And then Joe, on the consulting side, who helps me out, I brought him as a graduate trainee at M&M Direct. Decided to launch a graduate trainee program. Didn't have one. I said, "Why don't we just bring some graduates in and train them up?" And he was one of them. And I sort of hadn't met him for a few years, but he'd done really well since then in his career, and had worked in some e-commerce sort of MD type roles. And he was looking for something to do, and I said, "Well, why don't you come and help me out?" And he's been with me sort of 4 or 5 years. So I generally don't think, even with all the talk about luck, without those two, we wouldn't be where we are today. Obviously I've had a big part to play in it, but I wouldn't have been able to rely on them, and get as far as we've got, I think, without, and that was a bit of luck that they were there and available.
Yeah, it's refreshing to hear actually as well, because I think there's certainly, in my time, I've come across people that have created incredible businesses from scratch, and I guess find it really difficult on the team perspective, because it's theirs. They want to keep it theirs. And I think when you get to a certain level of seniority as an employee, you want to start having a bit of influence, don't you? You want to start to, kind of help make decisions that are going to really change the outcome of the business. And I think, it's quite common for people that have built businesses from nothing to something, fairly reasonable, to not listen to, other people, or allow other people to have a kind of direct influence on their business. And I guess I kind of understand it in the sense that, well, I've built this from scratch. This is mine. I've done a really good job so far. But how important has that been for your business? Like, having people that can, do the job and have an influence on how the business has turned out.
Yeah, you can't scale without it. That's for sure. I mean, I'm still a big driving force in a lot of the innovation and stuff. I mean, and personally do a lot of the innovative trading coding that we do, because again, I'm straddling all these review meetings, and I'm going, I think, Christ, if I only had this report, that would improve, my dev guys, who are great, they just don't have that interaction and stuff. So I'm still a big drive force, but I think it's about trusting. Like, we've got 40 clients, which means 40 review meetings a month. I can't sit in all of them, so I have to have someone like Joe that I could trust to be 100% interchangeable for me, and he thinks like me, and I trust him. I trust him impeccably, and the same with Matt. I trust his tenaciousness to try and keep things working and improving. So I think there's, and in that particular case, I don't know half the stuff that he knows, so you have to trust him. Really. So I think it's just about, I'd say that if you can build a core of people, then that's probably enough, rather than having to have 300 people you can trust. It's not like I trust all the team. I've got a really good team, but I'm just really functional that the core is so strong. And then that means that actually, you can expand because you have enough. If it's just you and you're trying to do everything with lots of people, it's harder. But if you can build a core of people around you that are really good and you trust, then it will get you a long way.
Definitely. Going back to the early days, sitting in the bedroom, coding, developing this thing. How significant was self-doubt? Was there any, or was it more of you knew exactly what you wanted to do and you were so confident that it was going to work that you were just kind of thrashing through it?
I guess it's because I'd sort of had a prototype that I'd built previously, although I was starting again from scratch. But I literally did start with a blank sheet of paper the second time around. Like people, you must have taken some code, because it was architecturally not as strong, because a lot of this stuff starts at how you architect it at the beginning.
Yeah.
And so starting with a blank sheet of paper enabled me to completely re-architect it and put it in a stronger place. So I literally did start from a blank file and start to build it. Because I had the prototype before, I was like, well, hold on, I've done this already. I built that. Surely I could do a better job of it. There were a few technical bits that I needed to. I was really weak on, like back end sort of SQL stuff. I've never been a SQL developer, and it's a lot of it's SQL and stuff. And so I sort of muddy my way. This is pre-ChatGPT days. Probably would have been all right these days. I probably would have got there much quicker. But I sort of muddled my way through it and got to enough knowledge about it. But then when Matt joined me after the first couple of months, he was like, you need to do this, we need to do that. And, that like I said, that was a real more professionalizer. And look, this is one of the biggest challenges is data and data integrity, right? Because we're custodians of people's data. So we've been down a route of cyber essentials, ISO 27001, really painful, especially for a small business like ours. But it's been really important that we have all of the, that it isn't just me in the bedroom. It has, it's a proper business, and it certainly is now with ISO 27001. I did used to present to people in those early days, and they were like, where's your dev team based? And I was like, well, here, I am the dev team, because it was me at the start, me and Matt, and that was it. But the product looked really good. They were like, this is an amazing product. Where's your dev? Where's the dev team? Like, well, you're looking at the dev team, really.
Yeah,
but
incredible.
Yeah, it was fun, and I joked to the wife about it. Remember, because it was a sunny day, she'd be sat out in the garden, enjoying the sun. At the end of the day, and I'd sort of come down into my day with a glass of wine and say, oh my God, I've got someone to pay me £200 a month for this platform. I think we could, this could be, could be onto something, and fortunately, they've gone a bit higher up in the fee, but because I think we probably would have imploded if we were dealing with loads of people at £200 a month, because it's not scalable at that, because it's quite hands-on what we do.
Yeah, so I find it fascinating and I find it great, and I think going through that process, kind of being made redundant, and then making the decision to go at something on your own. Like, can you describe, first of all, the feeling that you get when you get the first client? Like, that's got to be like a massive relief, right? It's got to be that, Jesus, somebody's actually going to pay me for it. They believe in it as much as I do.
It definitely is. I mean, those first, that first year, I guess, was there were some wins like that where I was like, Christ, this is, but also that I could see we're adding value to them. So it wasn't just that they were buying it. It was the fact that I could see it making a difference, the visibility that we would bring. Again, some of my previous expertise helping them out, but they tended to be smaller businesses, and that brings their own challenges. Very personal to someone who's turning over 200 grand a year, selling widgets. It's their, and they might have put money behind it and stuff. So they tend to be a bit more demanding, and there were mistakes along the way. I mean, we did some paid search for people because I wanted to bring some money in, but that wasn't really core to what we did, and was a distraction, and actually was quite painful. I had a brilliant girl doing it for me, but people were just really super focused on efficiency of paid search. So we stopped doing that. Talk about luck though. I got really lucky. There was a business that I'd worked for previously, and they said, look, we need you to come and be. We need interim help. So can you come and do 2 or 3 days a week for 6 months? And it paid really well, and it sat alongside building it up. So it meant that it brought some money in. So we're bootstrapped. So I didn't have to raise any money because that paid really well. It was only me and Matt initially on the payroll, and a couple of other sort of not so expensive heads. So it really built the coffers up. So that was luck. That was luck that contract came about, and wasn't core to what we were doing, but it just gave me the financial headspace to through the business to basically build it out in a bit of time, rather than it, because I think that's one of the, like anything, if you're it's that fight or flight, right? If you're under too much stress and strain and whatever, you're not going to be optimal, and that just alleviated that a bit, so that it brought me the sort of financial confidence in the business too, because I'd say that's probably the biggest thing that used to keep me awake at night is you are now responsible for these people.
Yeah.
You've got. I mean, luckily we've got money in the bank now and we're profitable and all that type of stuff, so it doesn't keep me awake at night. But initially, you're like, I've just convinced this guy who's just been made redundant to come and work for me, and now I'm responsible for him and his life, and it just becomes a thing that I probably didn't think I would have done originally. Had I been brave enough to do it, but. But it's it sort of worked out, and hopefully we'll continue to grow, and we've got a great team, and we do all enjoy what we do. We're fully remote. It's another thing. No office. Well, luck again. If I'd have launched this business prior to COVID, people used to expect you to go and meet with them.
Yeah,
like business development trips. The monthly review meetings, all of that would have been in person. All of a sudden, everyone's, today I must have had 5 different types. I've had a business development call. I've had a monthly review meeting. It's just meant that you can be much more fractional without any travel time. So we all work from home, and we're meeting up actually in 2 weeks down in Southampton, and we'll get them together. We get together like 4 times a year. And this one will probably have we have a nice meal and everything, but other than that we're fully remote, and but that again, game changer for me. All of a sudden I can fit eight different types of meeting in a day rather than one. It's just that's a bit of.
Well, I remember back in my distribution days, which was directly before COVID, I actually similar thing. I got furloughed and then made redundant from this business. But I remember they'd send me to Leeds to go meet Asda for a meeting for 1 hour. So it's like 10-hour round trip for a 1 hour meeting. And it was, Teams calls were a thing. Like, it wasn't like they weren't a thing, but it was just, these are a really kind of, high profile client, and we want, face-to-face contact. And I think, I just look back at that and think that's just bizarre. I mean, I can understand that maybe, once every 6 months, maybe once a year, even once a quarter, maybe. But yeah, every month to drive a 10-hour round trip.
I think it's I guess the proof is in the pudding, right? If those meetings, and by the way, a lot of them, half of their team aren't there, right? A lot of them are home or whatever. And, if those meetings you'd be judged on your outputs, right? Yeah. Always been a big believer of that. And if the meetings are delivering a great result, then, why spoil it by having people? We get asked to go there occasionally.
Yeah, I think, and I think I agree. Like if it was a meeting that was going to yield real value, and even in my, in what I do now, if I think there's real value to both parties for me to go and do a face-to-face meeting, then I do. I go to London frequently to meet people and whatever else. But this was just more of a,
it's the old way of doing things.
Check in.
Yeah, it was the old way of doing things. Exactly right.
Yep, we're just doing this. We're just making sure this is all good. That's all still good. That's, it could have easily been done on a call. It always baffled me a little bit. But I guess, that's 11-hour working day for a 1 hour meeting, and now all of a sudden you can do an 8-hour working day.
I was still doing 11-hour working day for 11 meetings, unfortunately.
11
But
meetings.
yeah, but yeah, no, it just has made us a lot more efficient.
Yeah.
And it means, and I mean, we had, and it means we can do it at a good price, right? That's the key. Is, you know, we're really sensibly priced, but we make money on it because we're so efficient. Whereas, you know, I did have an opportunity that came up recently. They say, you know, a sales pitch, you know, you have to come here. We only do in-person meetings. I was like, well, you're not right for us then, because if you can't work out that if that was the case, then everyone would be having to pay 4 times what we charge them. Then you know, you're not, unfortunately, not quite right for us, and that's hard to walk away from opportunity, but it's just the reality of it.
Yeah, and I think the world is kind of almost going back that way. You know, a lot of job roles that are coming up at the moment are kind of 100% in office, which were kind of a thing of the past, weren't they, for a little while?
I think that's probably right for a lot of businesses. I just think it's the way of doing work with suppliers and stuff. I think that's changed. I think people are really have really gone, well, hold on, I did used to drag you here for an hour, but that was just sort of almost proving, you know, proving that you wanted to come for an hour, you know. Whereas now I think people are a lot more, look, there's so much inefficiency in that, you know, without even thinking about all the green, you know, benefits of not driving around the country, you know. So I think people are just a lot more accepting of it now.
Yeah, I agree. And just going back to something you said earlier, something I'm kind of fascinated in is talking about, you know, coding and how you find it relaxing, and you know, how it's kind of therapeutic. Where does that come from, do you think? Like, is it, and where did you learn to code? Do you think there's a connection?
I've always been quite mathematical, and yeah, I think, you know, I don't know. I think I probably would be a big Sudoku person if I had the time to do Sudoku. You know, it's just I like that sort of mental. I do think I do process things pretty quickly. Like, it's just how I am. You know, some people are lucky like that, right? I mean, I couldn't. I think I'm a bit dyslexic, never been diagnosed with it, but I have to read my emails 4 times before I send them out, because they're always wrong. Yeah. You know, always use the wrong words or whatever. So I have to work really hard at something like that, and have to be really careful that you know, I'm there's a quality and stuff before I send it out. Whereas with you know, I remember back in my my Argos days, the sort of team would come in and they'd present me with some numbers or something, and I go, well, that one's wrong, and they'd be like, well, what do you mean? I said, well, that can't be right. And they're like, no, we've checked it. And I was like, no, that's wrong. And they'd go out and they'd come back. I thought, yeah, that was wrong. You know, it's just something that I just had in me, that sort of triangulating things, always been one of you're not being happy that something's there, or we've got to sense check it with another couple of things around it. Does it make sense? You know, it's just something that I've been fortunate that comes naturally. So the coding, I think, is just an extension of that. There's an endorphin that you get when you fix a problem. I'll tell you that now. Like, if I'm sat trying to solve something and then I solve it, it's slightly less when you're using ChatGPT to do it, which has been another game changer for me and us in terms of solving some of these problems that probably would have taken me a week before, it now takes an hour. Yeah. But it still doesn't get you all the way there. So there's a sort of endorphin that you get when you're like, Christ, I've been trying to get this to work, and finally the number that I think was supposed to come up and looks right's arrived. You know, I get a kick doing it. So, you know, there's I think that's what spurs you on to the next one.
I think it's yeah, I understand, and you know, I think that's definitely a thing. You know, it's like when you're trying to remember something that you can't remember, you know, and then all of a sudden it comes to you, and that feeling of relief of, like, you know, something so minor. So when you're fixing a major problem, or major as in, you know, a physical problem that you need to solve, I can definitely see how that, you know, that kind of almost relief. But yeah,
To back to your thing about success, I guess. So for me, like I have more endorphins over those things, and there's probably lots of little ones of those, than I ever had about the status of I mean, Argos, we had drivers, we had chauffeurs, I'd say, and stuff, and I never, or just the general status of being an X or a Y, it never that bizarrely never really. Of course, it's great to be that, but I didn't get any necessarily pleasure in it, in terms of the status, and that I get more out of solving problems actually. And sometimes in organizations, the higher you get up, the less close you are in solving the problems. You solve bigger ones, you don't solve lots of smaller ones. And maybe that's just my motivation's always been like solving small things rather than giant things.
It is interesting because I think you talked about resilience earlier, and I think in order to solve these problems, you've got to be, I guess, resilient, but also there's got to be a real hunger for you to solve that problem. And I guess that hunger comes from those endorphins. Do you think?
I think so, yeah. It's a sort of tenacity. I don't like failing, I guess, in terms of all of those little failures. And, there have been some failures over my career, many failures. I've just learned from them, and, it's inevitable. You put yourself up for stuff. You're gonna fail at some things, but I think I learned as much about those things that haven't worked out well as the things that have, to be honest. So, like I said, you learn a bit about yourself. You learn how resilient you are. Perhaps that's how I've ended up where I've ended up. If someone offered me a big retail CEO role, I mean, I guess that was another thing that I had to do is, the phone stopped ringing. I'd had a couple of things that hadn't quite worked out. And, you went from being the sort of the person that everyone was after to, someone that didn't get recommended for roles that often. So I was like, well, I'm going to have to try and make some money somewhere else. So start my own thing.
Yeah. I'm and I kind of like, I'm really interested, but I can really understand, the feelings that you're talking about, and and the, where you've come from to where you're going to get to. I think where a lot of people struggle is while solving these problems. So obviously not all problems are coded, there are other issues and problems. Whilst trying to solve those problems, people start to doubt that they're going to ever do it. They're going to doubt that they've ever kind of got around it. They're going to doubt that what they're going to do is valuable. They're going to, possibly even start doubting themselves that they're capable, and somebody that's had failure in the past that could potentially kind of contribute to that feeling of self-doubt, that feeling of, I'm not sure that this is going to work, I'm not sure that this is going to happen. What do you think are the things that people need in order to kind of, get past those fears? I guess they're fears.
It's just, I think it's all, for me, it's break it into smaller things. That's always been the thing. Like it can be a massive, it can seem a very daunting thing, but just, break it into things, approach it logically. I know it's really hard to do when you're in the depths of despair, and there certainly have been moments like that. And there was times when, in some of the roles where I'm walking along Oxford, you just got to get through today. If you can achieve this and this today, then it might make the impending issues less issue-like, and it's so I think it's just try to not see it as this overarching darkness. Sounds a bit a bit too fancy words for me, but no, don't just break it into smaller things, and then it won't, and you can start ticking them off, and then you won't feel so bad about it all. And I'm like, like I said, I'm lucky. I quite enjoy fixing all those small things. Yeah. So it sort of is. That's the way I got through it all, was just breaking it into, if I could just bring one piece of insight out today, then we're a bit further forward than we were yesterday.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah, I get it. And it's like, it's just for me, it's kind of fascinating you talk about the journey that you've been on. You talk about how how your kind of mind works, and how your reward system works, I guess. And I think as all of this stuff's kind of contributing to the person that you've kind of become today. You've become the person that you wanted to become. The person that's doing something that they love, and you're enjoying what you do. It's successful. So when you look back to those times of I guess hardship and despair and concern, I I think certainly for somebody that's had roles like yours, where you're in pretty senior positions, it's pretty easy for kind of somebody to come in and say, well, you're halfway through coding your new your piece of software, and then somebody comes in and offers you a huge salary. Like, where would you have gone at that point if that had happened? Would
I think when I was post COVID, I was like, look, I'm enjoying this too much to ever, like I said, I do think there's as you get older, if you get associated with a couple of things that not through your fault, in my view, that haven't quite worked out, it gets harder to get offered roles. I think I do remember going for a role somewhere, and the people it was private equity backed, and the people in the business really wanted me to go there. Like the CEO, it was a bigger business, so it was a MD within a bigger business, and so did the CFO and the private. I went to see the private equity guys, and I thought it went quite well. And then they said, "Oh, we've taken a bad reference on you," right? Which is I just thought it was crazy. Right? I don't think anyone would have bad. I wouldn't think so. Have a bad thing to say about me, and so they said, "Well, we want to speak to some more people," and I told them where to stick the job. Actually, I was like, you know what, this is a problem for you. You've got a CEO and an FD who really want me to go and work with, and they've met me, spent a lot of time with me, and you're now saying because you've had one person give a bad reference on me. So I was fine with it. And so I think you just have a few of those things around. You go for a job, someone just blackballs you a bit on it and stuff, and you're so there I to be honest, I didn't have the chance to anyone come up and say, here's a big job with a load of money. It hasn't been like that.
But had you written it off in your mind? Like, had you kind of
gone, pretty much. Yeah.
Right, I'm just going for this now.
Yeah, pretty much. I was like, you know what, this is what I need to do to create an income going forward. By the way, like I have done, I've been chairman 3 businesses, and had some success through that. And so I could be non-exec and stuff, but it would, because I think that's the way that I would get back into that world, is in a non-exec capacity. I haven't got a problem with corporate world, it's more what I enjoy, right? Yeah. So I would love to go and be chairman again at a business. I'd love to be a non-exec at perhaps a larger retail business or whatever, but right now it would detract me from what I'm doing. I mean, I love, as you might have guessed, I love telling stories about things that I've done. I think I have experienced quite a lot, and I'm a bit of a sort of anecdote addict, and just constantly will dish up anecdotes, boring my team to death with. I told you this story yet about when I did this, and so I've seen a lot of things, and I like to share that. I used to like to share those in LinkedIn like posts. If I'd see something in the paper that I had a view on in the news, I would do that, and. But I just and people used to say, "Oh, I like that piece or whatever, or I like the thing you wrote the other day." But I suddenly dawned on me about a year ago, that's distracting me from improving the product. Right? I've got this. I still haven't finished. I used to use the example of the cathedral in Barcelona, the Familia, whatever, saying, omnicommerce will never be finished. Of course, they're trying to finish it now, right? So that's that anecdote again. That example's not going to be there anymore. But I generally don't think it ever be finished. And yes, I would like to be sharing my views with the world on next performance this week, and it's been stellar, and Wolfson's been there for 30 years. And what does that say about continuous management and sticking with people? I'd love to do a piece on that, but the hour I spend writing that, maybe half hour with ChatGPT, but the hour I spend writing it is an hour could be improving the product.
Yeah.
And it's just, again, my perspective on that's changed a bit.
Yeah, I think that's a good good way to look at things, isn't it? Because I always feel as if, like, if you look at look at something that's done, finished, and it's not going to get any better. We've got it. That's it. Let's go and sell it. Then I suppose it's like the passion falls away a little bit, doesn't it? And it becomes, you can get overtaken for a start. But I think from a business owner's perspective, I think if you've always got something that's never going to be finished, then there's always going to be stuff to do. You're always going to be kept occupied.
I genuinely think with the way things constantly change, I just genuinely think we're never going to be done. Whether it's look at where TikTok shots come from nowhere.
So true.
Look at AI. I mean, I know everyone's talking about it, but it's only really in the last 12 months. I mean, I get up early in the morning with our dogs, and I sit on YouTube, before the family get up and stuff, and every morning there's another AI release. Copilot today have released 5 new bits of functionality, and it's just coming thick and fast. So keeping on top of that, making sure we're leveraging it, that's the next wave. It's going to happen quicker than the last wave, but it's going to happen. I just generally think we'll never be done.
No, it's frightening. AI in particular, we were talking earlier before we switched the mics on about the app that I developed, and it was an idea that I had years ago. We were kicking it around for years, had conversations with developers. we were trying to get developers to kind of build it for equity, because we just didn't have the cash to pay. And one developer wanted 350 grand to kind of build the software. And so we kind of kicked it around for 2 or 3 years before, funnily enough, Alan Wilson sort of came in and said, well, look, there's AI tools now that can probably assist you with this. And we've basically built that app using AI, just using prompts. There's no code whatsoever, and it's not a finished product. It's not a finished article. It will need development at some point, but it's unbelievable where we've got that piece of software to without one piece of code. Yeah. It is unreal, and I think it's kind of frightening but exciting at the same time. And I think it's just embrace it and roll with it rather than try and shut it down. I guess is the way to kind of to do that.
Yeah, you talk about the motivation. I think that's the thing that I've always liked to make a difference. I guess go into a role. I'm not a caretaker. I can't go. I'd have to go in and change. For the better, because it should need everything. I've always liked creating things. So I think sometimes in roles I've got a bit bored once I've got through that. Once you've done a lot of it, in a corporate role, you're like, God, it's not challenging me anymore. I'm not creating stuff anymore. I've done crazy things, like I launched a Berlin business. You talk about an app. I worked with a developer creating a game. That was a sort of numbers and letters game. Didn't get anywhere. We built it, and it existed for a while. It was all my idea. Something I thought up on the train, and so I love that. It didn't cost me a lot of money or anything, and so it wasn't a big deal. But when I launched it, I'm like, oh, that's that was fun, and so I do like that stuff. I'm just, like I said, happy, and I'm fortunate enough that I've fallen into something where I'm doing that every day, creating stuff, that's making a difference.
Yeah, I think I've been there before as well, where you roles haven't gone as well as you'd like them to. And I always think back, and I always like to take responsibility. I don't ever like to say, that definitely wasn't my fault, but there have definitely been occasions where, I've gone into a role with, being told, this is going to be, you're going to be really influential, you're going to be able to make key changes, key decisions, and then you kind of get in, you start to kind of navigate it, and then all of a sudden somebody puts the brakes on. It's almost like they get a little bit scared of losing that control, and it's like, and then that's when I become a little bit like, oh, this is, like you say, the caretaker.
Just day to day. Even then, I've seen those. That's happened to me. I've seen some of those things as a challenge. like if there's someone in an organisation that's been there for years who's a blocker, you know, I've always thought, well, I'll go try and get around that blocker, or you know, in terms of how can I, you know, use my skill set to sort of, you know, everyone's saying, well, you'll never get that through that person, you know, and that's like, oh, okay, that's a challenge. I quite like that. So I do, you know, there's you know, there's always been a bit of that in me, is that if no one else has done it, then I'd quite like to be the one that finally sort of crack that one. But but I know what you mean. It's sort of, I think that's the most refreshing thing about having your own business. I have to say that is, you know, I've had to say to clients, you know, I don't think that's an appropriate way to behave. You know, occasionally, once or twice over the last 5 years, where I think they've been unreasonable to a team member or whatever. And, you know, there's something really refreshing in that. Also just being able to be honest with them. So, look, you might not like what I'm about to say, but I can't sit here and not say it, because I can't build my business holding stuff back. Even if you don't like it and you want to leave us because, you know, you don't like what I'm saying, I have to say it, you know. So there's something quite, you know, refreshing in that is not having to, you're right, have those constraints that you often get, which I don't really want to say that because my kids are at private school, you know, I've got a mortgage, you know, I can't really say what I think. I've just got to sit here and, you know, take them. I'm not saying everyone does that, but there's a pressure in all of that stuff in the corporate business, because there's so many other things at play. Whereas in your own business, it's sort of you can. Well, luckily we've got to the scale now where you can be honest with people. Or even in the early days, I wouldn't really want to do it unless I was, you know, I could do it my way. Yeah. You know, honestly, you know, with honesty, you know, with humour, you know, but without being, you know, differential to people. You know, it's just, that's our style, really.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's you know, probably something that's tripped me up over the years. I mean, some leaders, business owners that I've worked with have really appreciated, you know, my honesty. I'm not a yes man. Like, if I've got a different opinion, or if I think something could be done better, I will always be the one that sort of kind of sits up and says it. And unfortunately, occasionally, it has the opposite effect. People start to think, well, you know, you're not a good fit because you think this, and you're sort of like, well, I'm just trying to give you a different perspective.
I do think back to that time at Kingfisher with Sir Jeff and I'm like, what was I on? How did I don't know what that 28-year-old lad was thinking when he went into his office and said that. I really don't. I don't know what I was on. I really don't. I wasn't on anything. I just don't know how I had the. What was it? There must have been a bit of fearlessness in that. I don't know. I really don't know.
It's quite good, right? It's a good quality to have, I think, and I think about, if I own a business, you know, I don't want people that are just going to go, yep, we'll do that. Your idea is always a good idea. I want people that are going to challenge it. I want people that are going to say, well, actually, what about if we did it this way? Or, I'm not sure what we're doing here is going to work.
I was fortunate enough then that I was in every meeting, right? He would bring me in. He was like, well, this, you know, he obviously liked the fact that, you know, how I was honest with him and didn't hide back. And, you know, perhaps having all of that exposure then was what led to the Argos role, you know, because they would have been impressed by, you know, I don't know. It was a bit of, that was probably a key moment of my career. To your point around, yes, I remember there was a subsequent presentation to the city that I was then involved in, and we'd been building it out, and he's a real character, Stuart Mackay, and he said, look, I think we should change it. And this was, you know, the night before, and he was, you know, and everyone around the room was like, yes, yeah. And I was like, Jeff, we can't change this, it's too late. I said, it's perfect. So we worked really hard on this. And he was like, okay. And it was like, and all these people have been paid like 3 times what I was being paid. Right? Yes, we'll do it. And I was like, no, we're not changing it. It's, you know. And he's like, all right then. And it was funny.
Yeah, that is, you know, that's definitely kind of what would make you stand out, I guess, wouldn't it? But I mean, I've got a few questions for you, if that's all right. Mm-hmm. We kind of, you know, it's been fascinating chatting. We kind of always try and ask 3 kind of quick fire questions that towards the end of the podcast. So if you could have done anything differently throughout your kind of career, or if you could change anything, would you?
I think there was a bit of naivety at times when I'd, in that middle section where there were times when I trusted some people perhaps I shouldn't have trusted, or so that was the only thing where I think I probably could have had better judgment. But I think I don't regret the journey that I've had in terms of the bad moments of it, because like I said, I've learned as much from them. But I think there are a couple of times when I've gone back and thought, I trusted this person and I was a bit naive. So yeah, that's the main thing. But that's I think it'll be the same with anyone, actually.
Yeah, I agree. And I think we have this conversation quite a lot, how those moments that you would do anything to get out of, they're probably the most important moments, right? They're the moments that you kind of look back on and go, I wouldn't actually change that situation, or I get made redundant all over again because it meant that I did this. And I always find that quite interesting. If you could put your success, as in being where you are now, doing what you want to do now, if you could put that down to one character trait of yours, what do you think that character trait would be?
I think it probably is resilience then, because it's resilience that helps you go through the crap times, and you learn a lot from the crap times. And, I think it is being, for whatever reason, quite resilient. Actually. Yeah.
I think, I think I've definitely picked that up in this conversation. Like I think one of the key things that's really stood out is how, you seem to go through things, and like you talked about problem solving, like there doesn't appear to be too much kind of doubt or distraction. It feels like you're very focused on solving that problem, and you're going to kind of solve it if it's the last thing you do. It proves how important that quality is, right? To kind of have that kind of mindset.
Yeah. Even small things and big things, I guess you just have to get on with it.
Yeah, 100%. And then if you could give all of the listeners one thing to take away, one piece of advice, what would that piece of advice be?
I just think you're only going to be at your best if you're yourself. It's I remember going to a Tesco thing where there was a load of grads, and I was like in the top 20 people at Tesco at the time, and they brought you along to speak to these grads, and the HR person said, you need to be like Steve. And I'm like, no, you don't. You need to be yourself. And that's because you can't pretend through life. You can't honestly deal with someone on a confident basis if you're like I said, if you're softening it up for them or lying to them, because you just can't do it in a sustained, consistent way. So, just be yourself, and and that will hold you in. I mean, it's quite hard if you're an arsehole, right, to be yourself, but just be yourself, right? And because if you're not, it's just gonna, we'll never be comfortable, and I think you're only gonna ever be the most confident in what you do if you're feeling really comfortable, right? And if you're constantly trying to be something that isn't you, then you're gonna fail.
Yeah, it's a fantastic bit of advice, and so true, isn't it? Because I guess this is where the kind of a lot of self-doubt comes from, isn't it? People that have got to places by not being themselves, and then they get this should I really be here? I don't really deserve to be here kind of feeling. And then how are they ever going to kind of push on and kind of do anything? Whereas, if you've got to where you've got to by being yourself and being, I guess, the best version of yourself, then that gives you the confidence. Again, I go back to your resilience. Like you've clearly built up a confidence in that resilience, and it would be the same thing with your own kind of personality and your own kind of persona.
Yeah.
If you've kind of built that and it's got you to great places, then why wouldn't you be kind of super confident and but inner confident, not just externally confident, inner confident, because I think in a way that's probably more important. Really really cool, really interesting. Steve, I really appreciate your time.
No worries.
how can people get hold of you? How can people learn more about your business?
Omnicommerce.co.uk, steve@omnicommerce.co.uk. Yeah, we demo people's data for free. Business has to be a certain size for that. So if they're interested, they get to see what we do. Don't hold people into long contracts, 3-month contracts, but different in software. So we, rolling month after that. So we live or die by our contribution. But yeah, you can find me at steve@omnicommerce.co.uk.
Amazing. Thank you, Steve. It's
No
been
worries.
an absolute pleasure.
No worries.
Cheers.
Thanks.